My name is Alice, and I am 29 years old. Currently, I am in the final month of my pregnancy. The excitement of welcoming my first child is mixed with concerns, especially about my husband, Jacob, who is also 29. Lately, I have noticed a change in him, a certain irritability that has gradually become more apparent. This became even clearer during a recent visit to my grandparents' house. While setting up their Wi-Fi, Jacob seemed frustrated and annoyed. At first, I found his reaction unnecessary since Grandma and Grandpa barely use the internet. Despite us being occasional visitors to their home, Jacob's attitude raised some concerns. We couldn't access the paid movie site we usually use to pass the time, and Jacob constantly complained about it, even though my grandparents had paid for the Wi-Fi installation out of their own pockets just for him. Instead of appreciating their gesture, he found faults in the setup process. My grandmother and I, lacking much knowledge about technology, were flustered by Jacob's irritation. "It's not goggles, it's Google, and it's not columns, it's Chrome," my grandmother corrected him. In response, Jacob clicked his tongue loudly in annoyance. I understood his frustration, but an indescribable feeling lingered within me. Eventually, the installation was completed, and I realized that dealing with technology-related issues is a unique and demanding task, possibly even more challenging than physical caregiving. You know, there are computer classes specifically designed for the elderly, right? You could learn from someone else, just like hiring a professional caregiver, he said sarcastically, adding that I was unnecessarily exhausted. Then, without a second thought, he decided to go to the beach to surf, his favorite hobby. He was never this rude or short-tempered before. But as my pregnancy progressed, his irritability only worsened. Surfing became his way of venting whenever something upset him. Meanwhile, in my final month of pregnancy, I was left behind, feeling helpless and enduring the brunt of his frustrations. I found myself expressing my own worries at my grandparents' house. My grandmother suggested that Jacob might feel like the baby is taking me away from him. What I love about my grandparents is that their advice comes from years of life experience. It felt invaluable. One evening, as I was about to leave their house, my grandmother suddenly remembered something. "It must be tough doing household chores while pregnant. Take this with you," she said, handing me a container of homemade mac and cheese. When I served the dish for dinner at home, Jacob immediately complained. "Ugh, this again," he muttered. Ignoring his reaction, I gently rubbed my belly, feeling stronger kicks and severe back pain. More than anything, my belly felt unbearably heavy. My grandmother had thoughtfully prepared the meal considering my condition, yet Jacob remained ungrateful. "You're always going out. Are you really visiting Grandma and Grandpa?" he suddenly questioned. What was he implying? That bringing home mac and cheese was proof of something suspicious? Just like there is prenatal depression for expectant mothers, my grandmother suggested that Jacob might be going through something similar. "The outdated dishes are unbearable. Feels like something from the 80s, he grumbled. "I'm going surfing. I'll grab some pasta or something on my way back." And with that, he left again. I sat alone on a chair and let out a deep sigh. Surfing at night? Maybe seeing the baby would change something in him. I held on to a small hope, remembering my grandmother's words, "Babies make the world go round." However, I would soon realize just how naive that hope was. At the end of the month, I gave birth. It was a long ordeal, 5 hours of labor and an hour in the delivery room. For a first-time mom, I think I did well, but the pain was unimaginable. Yet, the moment I saw my baby's face, all the suffering became insignificant. Even though tiny, the baby had a perfect human form, down to the fingertips. I felt relieved, believing that all my worries would fade away and that Jacob's frustrations would also disappear. But he never came to the hospital to see the baby. Not once. Far from it, when I finally returned home, exhausted yet hopeful, he stood at the doorstep and asked coldly, "Is that really my child?" I froze in shock. "You were out so often, always saying you were at your grandparents' place." "I find it hard to believe," he continued. Then, without a shred of warmth, he added, "Give me some of your hair. I need a DNA test to confirm if this baby is really mine." What? Where was this even coming from? I had just returned home after enduring the agony of childbirth, and he was already accusing me? Was this fair? An intense wave of fury surged through me, stronger than anything I had ever felt before. Was he really accusing me of infidelity? More than his baseless suspicion, what infuriated me the most was his complete lack of joy at seeing our baby. Not even a hint of warmth in his expression. My anger erupted like magma from a volcano. If feeling joy upon seeing the baby was a maternal instinct, then his reaction felt like a direct attack on my motherhood itself. The next day, still reeling from his cruel words, I struggled to come to terms with the devastating realization of what my life had become. I had reached my breaking point and finally poured out my grievances to my grandparents, who had come to check on the baby. My grandfather, perhaps trying to offer support, shared his perspective. "If you haven't done anything wrong, why not take the DNA test? A woman can hold her head high if she is innocent, but sometimes men struggle to believe without evidence. Presenting objective facts is important. If this test clears his doubts, instead of holding a grudge against Jacob, ask him to make it up to you with a nice cake or something." His words helped calm me down a little, so I decided to submit my hair for the DNA test. If this could resolve everything peacefully, then so be it. However, a week later, Jacob slammed a document onto the table in front of me and exclaimed, "Hey! The test results. It says this isn't my child. What is the meaning of this?" He had gone to the Joseph Clinic for the test. As I stared at the paper in shock, I saw that it indeed stated there was no genetic match between him and the baby. "This is proof of your infidelity, you understand that, right?" he declared with a victorious smirk. I had absolutely no memory of anything like that. Overwhelmed, I took the document and rushed to my grandparents' house, where I broke down in their embrace. After a brief silence, my grandfather spoke gently. "Alice, you always came to us whenever you were in trouble, didn't you? It's okay. Leave this to me." With his wrinkled yet strong hands, he patted my shoulder and gently stroked the baby's head. The soft spot on the baby's skull hadn't fully closed yet. Since childhood, my grandfather had always reassured me with the words, "It's okay," and today was no different. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." A few days later, my grandfather summoned Jacob to our house for a discussion regarding the divorce. "So, it's finally happening," Jacob scoffed arrogantly as he arrived. Looking down at me, he held the DNA test results with confidence, as if he had already won. My parents were aware of the situation, but the decision was made that only the four of us, my grandparents, Jacob, and I, would meet. "For now, leave it to me," my grandfather assured me. As everyone settled into the living room, he initiated the conversation. "This is undeniable proof," he said, distributing copies of the DNA test results to everyone. Indeed, the document stated that there was no biological relation between Jacob and the baby. As everyone examined the paper, my grandfather confirmed, "This document is from Joseph's clinic, as it says here, correct?" "Yes, can't you read? It's clearly written," Jacob declared confidently, like a detective presenting solid evidence. "There's no escape from this," he sneered. "As long as I have this proof, I won't let you claim you don't remember anything." He leaned back with a smug grin, convinced he had cornered me. At that moment, my grandfather let out a small chuckle. "This is a genuine document, huh?" he mused. Then, he placed another similar-looking document on the table, right next to the one Jacob had brought. "This is also an official document from Joseph's hospital, where DNA test results are recorded," he continued. Turning to Jacob, he asked, "Do you recognize the name of the person who conducted your test?" Jacob hesitated, his expression shifting slightly. With a knowing smile, my grandfather revealed, "I recently took a DNA test myself, to confirm the biological relationship between my wife and our daughter. In other words, between Alice's mother and her." I blinked in confusion, trying to understand where he was going with this. "Take a close look, Alice," my grandfather said, comparing the two DNA reports. The format of Jacob's document is entirely different from the official one. Jacob's forehead began to glisten with sweat. "When you helped me set up the Wi-Fi, you sarcastically suggested that I should take computer classes for the elderly. So, feeling a bit offended, I decided to attend one," my grandfather continued. "There, I met a doctor from Joseph's hospital." Jacob's expression stiffened. "I found it strange that your test was done at Joseph's hospital," my grandfather continued. "Why not at Harris Maternity Clinic, where Alice gave birth? If it had been done there, they would have used Alice's saliva for the test, making any mistake impossible." Jacob's confidence was crumbling. "When I asked the doctor at Joseph's hospital about this, he was outraged," my grandfather said. "After further discussions, he suggested that showing you our official document would expose the truth." Jacob visibly trembled. "This amounts to forgery of private documents," my grandfather stated firmly. The doctor at Joseph's hospital was furious. "You should prepare for serious consequences." Jacob's face turned pale. His hands trembled as he finally muttered, Sorry." His voice was barely a whisper. I was reckless. I never thought I'd get caught." "What do you mean, never thought you'd get caught?" my grandfather snapped. "That just makes this even more unforgivable." Jacob clasped his hands together, bowing his head onto the table, begging for forgiveness. But my grandfather's face was cold. "I have no intention of forgiving you," he said firmly. "This is a tale I will take to the grave. Let me tell you how I uncovered the lie. The roles of the detective and the suspect had completely reversed. After hearing Alice's claim, I decided to investigate using my newly acquired computer skills. What I discovered was truly shocking." With steady hands, my grandfather powered up the computer, logged in, and double-clicked on the Google Chrome icon. "This is Google Chrome," I corrected him, recalling the humorous routine my grandparents often performed. "Right, Google Chrome," he chuckled. While my grandparents were unknowingly putting on their usual comedy act, I decided to do a reverse image search for a DNA test certificate. To my astonishment, the very first image that appeared was identical to the document my husband had initially shown me. Ironically, he was the one who had suggested I take computer classes, and that's where I had learned about image searches. The arrogant remarks he had once thrown at my grandfather had now come back to haunt him. "Naturally, we're curious about the motive behind this forgery," my grandfather stated, thrusting a bundle of papers toward Jacob, who was now sobbing with a runny nose. "I hacked into your computer," my grandfather declared. Jacob's head shot up in shock. Hacking," he stammered. I was just as startled. "Wait. Grandpa, you hacked into his computer?" "To be precise, he corrected. I snooped into it, the one in his room. But how? Jacob exclaimed. It has a password. Must be 2398 or 1173, right? Jacob's mouth hung open. How did you know that? A retired police officer I met in computer class told me that people around this area often use those numbers as their pins. So, on a whim, I tried them, and, lo and behold, I got in. I gasped in realization. The senior network at Grandpa's computer class is something to be feared. But cracking a pin is only the beginning, Grandpa continued, his confidence growing. There's more. Do you know that Google Maps keeps a record of your entire location history? Jacob's forehead broke into a sweat. Drops trickled down onto the fake DNA report, smudging the ink. I searched through your timeline and matched it with the days Alice came to us in distress, and the days you went out. The locations you visited? Shady motels. Grandpa slammed a stack of printed proof onto the table. This alone won't be enough, huh, he mused. Jacob stayed silent, his hands trembling. This is more than enough, don't you think? Ready to confess? Jacob clenched his fists. No. I can't. Fine, Grandpa said, ignoring him. He picked up a tablet. I borrowed all the data saved on your computer. You thought enabling message syncing would be convenient, huh? Well, it backfired on you. Jacob's face turned deathly pale. I retrieved all your messages, Grandpa continued, his voice ice cold. Including your little exchanges with that woman. Jacob's entire body stiffened. He couldn't utter a single word. Then, Grandpa delivered the final blow. You were the one who told me to take computer classes, weren't you? And yet, while your heavily pregnant wife was struggling, you were off having an affair. Do you even realize how disgraceful that is? As a man, you don't deserve to be the father of my precious great-grandchild. He slammed his fist onto the table. You framed Alice for infidelity. You humiliated her. And worst of all, you used your own child as an excuse to frolic with your mistress. Absolutely despicable. Jacob's knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the floor, bowing his head in submission. But Grandpa wasn't done. To make matters worse, he said, his tone sharp as a blade, I've copied all the forged data from the fake DNA test report as evidence of your criminal activity. Jacob visibly crumbled. Naturally, Grandpa added, I've also transferred all of it onto this tablet. He turned the screen toward us. It was flooded with evidence, messages filled with affectionate exchanges, hotel reservations, and even photos. Hotel Lagoon was amazing. I really want us to be a real couple soon, winking face. The final nail in the coffin. I made my decision that very moment. Right after giving birth, I filed for divorce. Jacob was forced to pay a hefty settlement for his adultery. Both he and his mistress had to compensate me. I also made him pay child support in a lump sum, which put me in a more stable financial position. As the saying goes, when the money is gone, so is the relationship. And that's exactly what happened. Jacob's mistress abandoned him, and soon, I was inundated with desperate, tear-filled emails. I'm broke, she left me, please take me back. But I blocked him without hesitation. More importantly, Jacob was also being sued by Joseph's clinic for forging private documents. There was no chance I could ever reconcile with someone like him. Meanwhile, my child was embraced with warmth and love by my grandparents. Lately, they had started giggling at the sound of a bell, happily smacking a roly-poly toy with their tiny fists. Children grow up so fast, Grandma said, smiling fondly. She looks just like you, doesn't she? Grandpa added. She's going to be a beauty. No way, she'll be even more beautiful than me, Grandma laughed. Let's take pictures and make a photo movie, Grandpa suggested, already heading toward his beloved computer. A baby's face changes every day. I smiled, my heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, Grandpa. Thank you, Grandma. I love you both so much.